Hello everyone, my name is Ryjin, and Volume 8 of RWBY is probably my favorite volume of the show thus far. There's a lot of reasons for that, and certainly there is also a lot of trade-offs, a lot of ways that the volume falls short in doing what it set out to do. But this is my attempt at sharing my thoughts on the volume as a whole. I've also already put out a video about Penny and her time and her arc in Volume 8, so if you want to know how I feel about her, you can go ahead and watch that. I'm linking that in the description below, though I will touch on some of it here too. And if you're new here, please do like this video, comment, subscribe, share it, all those things. Yes, they do help. With that out of the way, let's get into it. It's been a while since Volume 8 ended though, so let's start with a summary. Chapter 1, Divide. Volume 8 starts the moment Volume 7 ends. Cinder and Neo fly up to Monstra the Whale to find Salem, Hazel, Emerald, Mercury, and Tyrion. Cinder gives Salem the Lamp of Knowledge, and Tyrion does a foreshadowing.
I'm afraid the doctor was a necessary sacrifice. I do hope this little one doesn't become another.
In the face of Salem, the heroes decide to divide and take on new objectives. Yang's group, with Jean, Ren, and Oscar, heads to Mantle to help people evacuate to safety at the crater. RWBY's group, with Weiss, Blake, Nora, Penny, and May, heads to the military compound to launch Amity and broadcast a distress message to all of Remnant. RWBY and Penny reject Ironwood, and he makes his first of many bad decisions. His Aesops accept it. Chapter 2, Refuge. Crow, Robin, Watts, and Jacques are in holding cells. Crow wants to kill Ironwood now. While Yang's group helps the evac effort at the crater, the Hound, who can change its body to fit any situation, takes Oscar away. Chapter 3, Strings. RWBY's group successfully infiltrates Central Command to activate Amity's launch. The Aesops step in, and Nora's overcharge to save Penny leads to severe bodily damage. The Aesops steal a sword that allows Watts to hack Penny by Ironwood's order. Chapter 4, Fault. Yang's group chases the Hound to save Oscar, but fails. Now stranded in the tundra, Yang and Ren argue about the point of their mission. Salem tortures Oscar and orders Cinder for the second time not to pursue Penny's maiden powers, but Cinder does it anyway. Chapter 5, Amity. Pietro, Maria, and Penny successfully launch Amity Tower, but Cinder and company interfere and lose in a fight that damages it. Penny stabilizes it so RWBY's pre-recorded message can tell all of Remnant that Salem is attacking Atlas, and they need to send help or prepare themselves. Ironwood has Watts hack Penny and has his Aesops retrieve her. Yang's group sees there is now a river of Grimm en route to the kingdom. Chapter 6, Midnight. Cinderfall was once an undesirable 10-year-old orphan servant. Rhodes trains her, but he doesn't help her mentally. She kills everyone for freedom. At present time in Monstra, Oscar and Ozpin realize they could turn one of Salem's supporters to their side. Salem punishes Cinder for going against orders and grooms her into retrieving Watts and heading for Penny. The show begins. While the Aesops find and apprehend Yang's group, the River of Grimm forms a geyser that destroys Atlas's shield. Salem invades. Chapter 7, War. Ironwood has his kingdom flee into the subway and orders the Aesops to hand-deliver a bomb into the whale. After Ren's semblance evolves, Winter allows Yang's group to get Oscar. Inside Monstra, Oscar tells Hazel Jin's name, hoping he keeps that information for himself. Tyrion and Mercury follow Salem's orders to head off to Vacuo, leaving Emerald behind. At the manor, RWBY's group disagrees with May about the next objective. Klein answers Whitley's call to give Nora treatment, and Penny Polendina crash lands at the doorstep. Chapter 8, Dark. RWBY's group helps Penny, and May has left for Mantle. RWBY and Blake turn the power back on so that Klein can help Penny and Whitley can evacuate all of Mantle into Atlas. The Hound attacks, and the Schnees get wrapped up in it too, but Whitley is able to start the evacuation. Once the Hound takes Penny, RWBY is there with her silver eyes. As it turns out, Salem can now turn silver-eyed warriors into this. Meanwhile, Cinder bursts into the jail and takes Watts away. Chapter 9, Witch. While the bomb arrives outside, Yang's group searches for Oscar inside the whale. Hazel takes Oscar to the lamp, and Oscar summons Jin, but nobody asks the last question. Hazel understands everything now, and vows to get everyone away from Salem. They leave the lamp for Neo. Emerald and Oscar find Yang's group and retreat to the landing bay, where Salem finds them. Hazel enters and turns on her, allowing the heroes and Emerald to flee. Oscar sticks around to temporarily destroy Salem and sacrifice Hazel. Chapter 10, Ultimatum. Ironwood receives words that his prisoners all escaped. Suddenly, Monstra explodes, but it wasn't the Aesops. They take their bomb back to Ironwood. Ying's group heads back to Ruby's with Emerald at gunpoint. She says she wants no part of anything anymore, but Oscar presses how much they need her. On a lone rooftop, Cinder gets heated with Watts and dangles him over the edge. He laughs at her, saying she has to be worthy and plan ahead if she ever wants success. She takes it to heart. The Aesops arrive at Ironwood's office. With a bomb, but without Crow or the kids in custody, Ironwood looks somewhere else for leverage against Penny. Once Yang's group gets to the manor, Ironwood gives an ultimatum. Bring Penny to me within an hour, or I blow up Mantle. Chapter 11, Risk. After Ironwood's broadcast, Marrow stands against him, and Winter gets them both away. Meanwhile, outside the jail, Crow is still determined to kill Ironwood, and Robin urges him to consider everybody else. The heroes deliberate in the manor about their next move, but Ruby can't take the pressure, and flees with Yang in tow. She says she knows their mother is what led to the Hound, and Yang says they need to focus on hope and take risks. In Weiss's room, Nora and Ren hash things out, with Ren apologizing for his behavior and lifting Nora's spirits. The heroes fight Penny's hack once again, but this time, Jean's semblance is there to keep her together. After so much has happened, the heroes are now ready to put their trust in both Emerald and Ozpin. Ruby gets an idea for Ironwood's ultimatum and calls him. Chapter 12, Creation. Before we know it, the heroes' plan is already in motion. Winter, Emerald, and Jean's team defeat Ironwood and jail him, while Crow, Robin, and Marrow disable the Aesops. To evacuate all of Atlas to Vacuo, Team RWBY uses the staff to create a new human body for Penny and a magical gateway complete with a central location. And John's team is supposed to let Atlas know. However, Atlas communications go down. As the heroes head through the portal, Cinder is poised to as well. Chapter 13, Worthy. The plan to save Atlas is in full swing. Ren, Oscar, and Emerald head right to Vacuo, and John and Nora alert Atlas civilians. As it turns out, Cinder and company used the lamp's final question to set up the perfect counterplay. They took over Central Command, where Watt shut down all of communication in Atlas. And now, he interrupts the fight with the Aesops. With the ultimatum broken, Harriet flees to the airship with the bomb, intending to carry out Ironwood's plan. Both Vine and Crow intercept her. Vine fails to persuade her to change course, and Crow starts a fight. Ironwood wakes up in the jail, and by some strange technical difficulty, or Watts, he is set free. And he sets Jacques free, from the mortal realm. Winter heads to the vault, so does Ironwood, and their fight begins. In the central location, Neo sends Yang, falling into the void. Penny chooses not to head to Vacuo with the staff. Outside that kingdom, Grimm arrive. Chapter 14, The Final Word. As Monstra decays, Salem reforms. Winter and Ironwood begin their fight, and Crow and Harriet continue theirs. Harriet frees the bomb from its hold, and Crow gets lucky for half a second, because Watts activates the bomb, and Vine sacrifices himself to it. Back in the central location, Cinder secures victory over both RWBY and Neo, snatching the lamp and sending them and Blake to the void. The three remaining kids stand together, but Cinder impales Penny with her Grim arm, causing Penny to have John end her life so she can guarantee her final thoughts are of Winter. In the white space, Penny is all smiles as she gives Winter the powers. The new Winter Maiden finishes off Ironwood and interrupts the ensuing fight in the central location. But she fails to stop her sister from falling, fails to stop Cinder from securing both relics, and fails to save Jean from the collapsing world. With her new creation killing Watts, Cinder lies to Salem about everything. Ironwood is crushed under the weight of his own kingdom. Crow, Robin, and the remaining Aesops watch Atlas fall. And the void leads somewhere. That's the summary out of the way. Now it's time for the review. First and foremost, I watch RWBY to find things that I enjoy in it, and I make content on YouTube primarily to share in the things that I enjoy. That's not to say that there won't be criticism in this video though, far from it, because you have to take the good with the bad. So as I go through the rest of the video, even though I genuinely, truly loved Volume 8, know that I still think it was too fast-paced, had too much packed into the narrative for its own sake, didn't have much of any fight choreography, and had multiple character arcs not get the time they needed in order to be well executed. And those criticisms all should be pretty agreeable. I just don't let those things stop me from watching for the things that I do enjoy. And when I say that Volume 8 is probably my favorite, what I mean is that it delivers on so many things that it's been building up to for such a long time. It's becoming more and more of the kind of show that I've always known that it could be. Salem stopped working through others, so the threat level is massive. Big story beats that otherwise might define an entire arc happen throughout the entire volume, which takes place in what before would typically only last 4 chapters. Maidenhood as a plot device is so much more interesting and carries more emotional weight considering how well it informs both Penny's and Winter's character arcs, and thus Atlas as a whole. The show is not afraid to get darker or more magical, and from all indications, it's taken the plunge. Volume 8 is entirely its own beast that took everything that had been set up and delicately juggled it while riding a unicycle on top of a tightrope. Like, yeah, it dropped the ball on some things, but no, to me it did not fall. Which is kind of ironic. All that stuff does come with a trade-off though. Salem stopped working through others, but of everyone I'm going to mention, she is the first character not to get screen time people wanted to see out of her. Once she's in an actual fight, it's over just like that, because none of the volume's fights are long at all. She's defeated temporarily in episode 9 and secures victory only through Cinder's actions. For the 4 volumes she'd been known to exist up until this point, when she'd work through others, her lack of acting means we can't really know how powerful she is or really isn't. As it turns out, like the gods she wants to smite, she herself is extremely fallible, and working through others isn't a good idea if there's any chance they turn on you. She had a great plan and was dominant, but that plan relied on other people's loyalty. Of course, she really only has 3 underlings now, and if she wants more actually loyal ones, she knows how to make them. And once that happens, there's no chance that they turn on her. For me, I've always seen Salem's greatest asset not as her strength or her manipulation, but as her immortality. No matter what, she will come back, and any marginal victory is an absolute one for someone who can outlast you. She didn't really need to last the whole volume, because no matter what, she would last the whole volume. It sucks that Volume 8 didn't give a lot of people the time they need, but now we have to look forward to the future to see how the rest of the series might make up for it. Considering the big story beats happening early and often, the downside to it is that they dominated the narrative and left little room for characters. Characters shined probably about as well as they could. Given that, there are a lot of great character moments, and I love each and every one of them, but I'll talk about the incredibly dense plot later. As far as the Maiden subplot goes with Penny and Winter, I loved it. I'll be completely honest here, the only trade-off I see for this is the fights are generally lacking, this volume. When Volume 3 introduced the Maiden powers, it was clear. Watch out, we got a plot device over here. So the question became how the writers could change what had been written to fit the device in a way that informs the characters in the material well, keeps it engaging. For Volume 3, it was another layer to Pyrrha's arc that then informed Jean's character. For the Mistral arc, it was a bait and switch that maybe you saw coming, maybe you didn't. For the Atlas arc, I have only good things to say about it. It's another tool to define Ironwood's Iron Glove that informs his, Penny's, and Winter's characters extraordinarily well. And for the three main Atlesian characters in this arc, it basically defines the arc. Penny and Winter are two sides of the same coin, a human trying to be robotic and a robot trying to be human. Both of them struggling to do so because of Ironwood. Penny and Winter begin the Atlas arc taking pride in owning their distinct place under the General, and as he acts single-minded and increasingly robotic as the arc goes on, they turn away from that in favor of their humanity. The Maiden powers are a distinctly human experience. And lastly, I love that Volume 8 matures the story into being darker and more magical. RWBY grows up with its audience, with the conflict getting heavier and darker as the time goes on. Characters aren't worried about a school dance anymore, but they do have to deal with this. In the past, the show hasn't fully committed to the level of dark that it could be. Often the worst parts were just left to being insinuated, and I think it could have done better on that front. Volume 8 though, there's a lot of torture. Like, a lot. And when something is insinuated, it's a hell of a lot darker than what came before. Volume 8 delivers on a darker tone, and it finally takes a plunge into its more magical elements. The Staff of Creation is so much more capable of opening up the plot to its mysticism than the lamp ever could. That's saying something. And through the staff, the story revisits what we've referred to as pocket dimensions, that we can now truly see are indicative of so much more that's going on beyond Remnant. When Volume 8 started, I said I wanted RWBY as a high fantasy show to grow into becoming a quote-unquote higher fantasy that delves deeper into its magic. And right when I was just starting out, I said this.
But I want the volume to end differently. Throughout the volume, we're given the sense of what the next volume will be, and then the show reveals something that immediately changes the next volume's entire goal.
I want something to happen that basically changes the next volume's entire goal. I said this crazy thing, I don't even think I explained it well enough at the time, and yet it, like, beat for beat happened. The heroes were suddenly thrown this other objective that they need to get done first, before they can hope to get back to the main objective again. So in summary, Salem is the big threat, set piece moments are everywhere, maidenhood is fundamentally important to story arc defining character growth, and the show is not afraid to get dark or magical. Volume 8 took so many of the things that I've been wanting to see in RWBY and made them fundamentally important to this volume and the future of the show. So, yeah, it's my favorite volume of RWBY to date, and it's made me so excited to get into Volume 9, even though I know that I gotta keep my expectations as low as possible, because we genuinely don't know what the heck is going on. We can't know.
The lamp. Find them.
Now to talk about the overly dense plot. I love that huge story beats pack Volume 8. The Amity broadcast, Salem invading, the nuke, creating the Yellow Brick Road, Atlantis, and Wonderland. All these things keep the plot extremely engaging. The flip side of it, though, is that it is incredibly plot-driven. At the same time, the characters are all affecting the plot as themselves, with, for instance, Cinder taking Watts' words to heart in a genuinely fulfilling way for her character. Here's one side effect of all this. Once it's time for the final push, it lasts only 2 chapters and everything happens so fast because there's just so much to juggle. To me, the final act could have used an extra episode to give the fights each more time to breathe and tell more of a story in themselves, instead of creating tension simply by cutting between them so much. In some ways, that is a great way to build tension. Like, Volume 4, the scene cuts back and forth between Crow and the kids in Oniyuri because it's building tension that Crow is trying to get to them on time. They are 2 scenes that interact, but you can't really build tension simply by switching between scenes that don't interact. So much of the tension in the end of Volume 8 is lost before it can really even be built up. And even though an extra episode would remedy this, you can't just tell a production to magically have the ability to create another one. Aside from the far too quickly paced final act, Volume 8's dense narrative led to a lack of character depth for a few characters. So Penny, Winter, Nora, Ren, and Ruby got huge character moments. But Ironwood, who'd had the most character depth out of anyone in Volume 7, was left lacking in Volume 8. Salem, who typically carries a wonderfully evil presence, doesn't quite command as much of one in the Chapter 9 fight as I think the writing would have wanted her to. I'm looking to see more out of Emerald and her interactions that I'm not sure how long it'll take to get to them. And in a broader, more general sense, I personally wish that life out and about on the Atlas streets was established sometime in Volume 7, and not Volume 8 the moment Atlas was invaded. Mantle felt alive, but Atlas didn't for a long time. One thing Volume 8 gets criticized for is that Ruby's group stays in one spot until the third act hits. That criticism is less about the dense plot and more about a perceived lack of agency. But the truth be told, I see it as a result of an overly dense plot. Writer Eddie Rivas has said multiple times that members of Ruby's group were originally going to go to Monstra, and that the second act of the volume, or more specifically chapters 6 through 10, went through a ton of iterations as the writers worked through how to actually make all of the story beats happen in a way that made sense.
There were so many versions of that outline. I will say at one point, Ruby and May were going to be on Monstra. That's how wildly different some of it got.
I think they couldn't find a way to make Penny and the Hound show up in the house and have Ruby's group go to Monstra believably within 4 or really 3 chapters. But if we need another episode that badly, and the crew can't make it, maybe we could ask Ambrosius for it? I realize that what I just said has a lot of assumptions, so I want to clarify. Eddie's words here are not enough for anyone to argue that Ruby's group would have actually gone to Monstra on top of everything else that happened. Eddie said there was a version of the outline, which is a very early stage of writing, where probably Ruby's group were going to be on Monstra, but that doesn't mean that things like Penny and the Hound showing up at the manor were finalized yet. Ruby's group might have had an entirely different narrative path for the second act. I don't personally take issue with Ruby's team staying. With Penny and Klein and the Hound showing up, it made that narrative arc so much more engaging for me. The Monstra confrontation isn't really as climactic as I would like it to be, but I don't put that toward Ruby's group's absence, just that it doesn't have as much of Salem's usual presence in it. I like Ruby's group's time in the house because those scenes gave us a sense of what it was like to live in those moments in Atlas, more than really any of the other narratives going on. That all being said, those are the broad problems that come with a behemoth of a plot with a low runtime. Yes, Volume 8 is the longest volume yet, but RWBY volumes in general are way shorter than the typical show. The simplest fixes for Volume 8 are a larger staff or a longer production cycle. Both would allow for longer runtimes without compromising anything. But I don't want to pretend like the writers do not or did not know how dense and fast-paced Volume 8 is.
I think one of the critiques we got for Volume 7 was that, because there was so much going on with the plot, we didn't have a ton of time for character moments, and honestly, we felt that super hard in the writers' room, just being like, can we at least just have a second for one of them to say hi to the other one?
They knew going into Volume 8 that there was not enough time to do everything they wanted to do. But they also knew the Volume 8 we saw was the best their small production team could make in the time they were given. And after Volume 8, by the way, they made those simpler changes for Volume 9. Volume 9 is delayed to 2022 instead of early November of this year, which means there's more time to make sure the volume is as polished as it can be. And to be perfectly clear, there is no downside to delaying it.
Find them!
Now to talk about the more technical side of the show. Lights, camera, action. Technically speaking, every volume of RWBY impresses me on some new level. the production quality levels up every year regardless of how well, as an audience, we can actually put our finger on what changed in the production process behind the scenes. From volumes 1 to 6, though, it is rather apparent. So there is this one video from this new guy, Rising, I think? That's how you pronounce it? I don't know, but it's his first video. Just go be nice to him. Go watch it, be nice to him. From Volume 6 on, though, I'd say it's less about the changes in the visual production pipeline and more about the increased attention to detail when it comes to set design and storyboarding and cinematography. There are so many scenes I could watch over and over and over and over and over and over again and not get tired of because I see how the characters inform it. The voice acting, the environment, the cinematography, the storyboarding, the musical score, beat for beat, so many scenes have so many different ways to appreciate them if you do watch RWBY from that angle, and I do. Like, for one, they managed to make the tundra setting so immersive and expansive without showing a far, extremely wide shot. What sells its sheer scale more is the camera. Like, at face value, sure, you could have that ultra-wide shot of them walking in a massive environment. That would get the job done, right? But no, you sell how big this environment is by bringing the audience tightly into the characters, choosing your angles carefully to show where the tension is, highlight the animations and body language, and yet still manage to show all 360 degrees. Since we feel right there with the three of them like we're rooted within that scene too, we feel how stranded they are, we feel how big the environment is just by default, innately. And this is probably the most universally liked scene in the whole volume. Watts delivers a Michelin star worthy rump roast to Cinder of her own ass. It is dinner and a show. Everybody feasts when Watts' spicy dialogue complements the bold flavors of the camera angles and flashback, mixing well with the juicy sound design with a side of emotional damage. The fact that Watts calls Cinder out on being a one-note basic-ass villain is just one reason you love this scene. The rest is thanks to how different aspects of production bring out how intense these characters are in the moment. Technically speaking, much like a good dish, a good scene is built up to be greater than the sum of its parts. I didn't even mention how pretty the environment is. And Volume 8 has so many environments. For me, that is one of its best features. What better way to tell an epic, interwoven story than to have a huge variety of environments? There are so many journeys to be had, and it all starts in a humble bar. Wait, burger restaurant? And by the end of it, I don't think we're on Remnant anymore. Suffice it to say that with Volume 8 telling a much more ambitious story than really it should have, its camera work helped bring an incredible amount of depth to the characters. There is so much emotional weight to Volume 8's story, even when a lot of the characters didn't get the time they needed. You're still able to key in on everything that is happening with so many of these characters, and you can thank the storyboarding and camera work for that. It's that sort of thing that allows the characters and world to feel more alive and full. Also along that line, the show gave a few background characters their own mini-arcs that sort of stood in for the masses as a whole. I really appreciated seeing them, and seeing kids. More than background characters acting as just citizens, having kids around, which Atlas introduced, gets into the family aspect of things too, and what it's like to grow up in the middle of all of this. Having watched RWBY since Volume 1 in 2013, it's incredible to see its visual growth, and I can only imagine how Volume 9 is going to continue it. As far as Volume 8's music goes, I could not be more excited for the original soundtrack. For its musical score. Sure, I want to listen to For Every Life, Be Strong and Hit Stuff, and The Sky Is Falling on repeat, but I am so much more interested in the score. Volume 8's is built different. Like, it's more than just composers Jeff Williams and Alex Abraham making it this time. It's literally built different. As we're on this grand adventure, the music shifts from incredibly spooky moments for Monstra and the river, to wonderfully mystical ones like Penny's rebirth. To a full orchestral of Winter's theme. And an incredibly tense beat building up to Hazel's fight. That's just to name a few. We will have to wait patiently for whenever Volume 8's OST releases, but please give the score a listen when it does. From the set design, to the storyboarding, to voice acting, to musical score, so many hands were involved in making Volume 8's environments full of life and emotion. I enjoy watching RWBY partly because I enjoy seeing how all of these things, and more, come together. Volume 8 did not disappoint. I saw a take recently about RWBY as a whole, but also Volume 8 that I really resonated with. Basically saying this is what RWBY is in the simplest of terms. RWBY is a narrative focused around a few central characters, using grand events as flavor and context for smaller, more personal moments, all held back by a restriction on runtime. You have to be at least somewhat willing to engage with it on this front, and that runtime problem gets worse when you consider how RWBY is notorious for having too many characters. Volume 8 has a lot on its plate, but it does everything it can to get the most out of its ensemble cast. You may or may not appreciate this scene that much, but I think it's deserving. Like, what are Weiss, Jean, and Penny of all characters doing making the final stand? This is an assertion that those three characters are as worthy of being there and having that level of focus as Team RWBY, while also kind of being indicative of the fact that everything that happened in the central location was plot first, characters second. But with the rest of the volume, things are a lot more character-driven, all things considered. At any point, it is up to any character to mix things up in ways that only they can. And with Volume 8 being so plot-heavy as I mentioned earlier, there are just as many moments that are central to moving forward character arcs. Of course, with so many characters, there is that pesky trade-off again. It can only use them so much in the time that it has, meaning that only a small number of them can make a considerable impact on the narrative. Volume 8 still uses its time to develop what it can, and in ways that it hasn't before. Chapter 1 has the characters split up, and it is the start of something great. For the rest of the volume, so many characters go on paths without the people that they're shown to be close to, moving forward just as well, if not more, with those that they don't interact with, proving that plenty still exists within them without that other person. Now, I'll go through all the characters as much as I can. Yes, all of them. RWBY's character arc shows a lot of promise, potential. That is the main thing that it shows. In other words, Volume 8 is the start of a major character arc for Ruby Rose. At the beginning, Yang starts a dispute that leads to the sisters taking separate groups out to respond to Salem's arrival. However, RWBY doesn't encounter any of Salem's forces until...
Take the girl.
You want RWBY to have a character arc? This is how you start one. She is going to be dealing with this for a long time. The Hound's purpose was to be a new beginning, for both RWBY and for Salem's potential going forward. That poor dude's silver eyes set off a downward spiral we are not done seeing yet. RWBY breaks for a moment, and though she puts herself together for the final push, the next plan fails, both relics are gone, and Penny is dead. Volume 9 seems like the perfect point to put her into the same, or even worse of, a mindset for her to come back from. And speaking of Penny, many of RWBY's scenes with her in this volume inform her character well. I would say that Penny was the most pivotal character for Volume 8 and did a phenomenal job. Again, I already gave all my thoughts on Penny in another video, so I do encourage you to watch that. But to give a quick summary, her character arc is about being human. That manifests as wanting to make her own choices as more and more prevents her from doing that. From the first chapter of Volume 8 to the last, she wants to make the most of her maiden powers, whatever that looks like, always struggling under the people who want to exert power over her, whether that's her father or the general. Weiss. Weiss's contributions to the Atlas arc weren't the most substantial. Anytime there was world building to be done, it was likely through her, whether for Atlas or the Schnee Dust Company. She contributed a lot in that regard, and I certainly appreciated seeing that. And as far as her not getting more of a focus, I honestly understand that. Her character has been at a great point for the narrative she's trying to tell since the end of Volume 4. Since Volume 7, she's become even more focused on carving out her own way, and now she'll be doing that in the absence of the Schnee Dust Company, not in spite of it. Blake. So, first off, I might be a little biased on this one, and I'll own that. I've gravitated toward Blake ever since Volume 1. This scene, to be honest, I really appreciate her time in Volume 8. Going back to what I said earlier, volumes in the past, with their limited runtime, typically only show the same characters interacting with the same characters, and for Blake, that was Yang. While I do think her ever-developing slow-burn romance with Yang is worthwhile, it has also severely eaten into her screen time interacting with anybody else, to the point where it's basically non-existent. Don't get me wrong, there are a few moments from Blake these past 2 volumes that I loved. She has a great presence in Volume 6, Chapter 5, checking in on everybody at the Brunswick house, but that's kind of it. Other than that, the show calls out how they always pair up, like they literally can't be in scenes without each other. Then, in Volume 8, in the same chapter where Yang pines for Blake, Blake's character is so far separated from Yang that she tells RWBY,
"If you're worried about Yang, you could always try calling her."
As if she doesn't particularly feel the need to. I loved having that. So many sides of Blake's character had not been touched in so long, and Volume 8 fixed that. The show finally called back to Blake's foundation, her pessimism in the face of all the bad in the world. She shares a moment with RWBY that builds from that in a way that RWBY really needs to hear, and helps her do this later on. Blake has comedic relief with both RWBY and Weiss, and coming off her arc against Adam, she shares a line with Nora, and that line reverberates throughout the rest of the volume, highlighting her similarities with others in the cast. While I'm sure Blake will have at least one significant scene with Yang in Volume 9, and I know it will happen, I hope the writing doesn't throw away the sides to Blake that we finally got to see again in Volume 8. Yang and Jean have a lot of great scenes together. Their performances in the first act really grounded that narrative's thread at the time, especially in this scene. Now, I will talk a little bit more about Yang in a bit, but for now I will say she played a great supportive role as the team mom in this volume. And Jean is a literal support character, but he does it so well. I'm looking forward to seeing where Jean's character arc goes after, well, this. Ultimately, this had to be Jean. Jean had to be the one to do this because RWBY would not. Weiss would not. They both outright refused to do it. And after Jean finally got over feeling responsible for Pyrrha's death, I'm interested in his reaction to being responsible for Penny's death, even with it being entirely her idea. Oscar. Oscar got such amazing character development in this volume. From his heart-to-heart with Oz in the second chapter onward, Oscar made some of the biggest and best contributions to the volume as a whole. He offered a lot of great perspective to the heroes in Volume 7, and had great scenes with Ironwood then too, but he really came into his own in Volume 8. And Ozpin, like Jean, offered a supportive role. I have said before that I want Oz to take a leading role, to lead from the front in some degree. What I mostly wanted out of that was for Oz to show more of what he is capable of magically, and lead the plot in a more magical direction. At the same time, the show is very much already headed there now, and is all about how the adults aren't exactly handling things in the best ways. Thus, the best way for Ozpin to navigate is by leading from the back, using his experience to give good guidance while not taking away from the kids' agency. He'll say, "Get the lamp to Atlas," and let them go from there. He'll tell Oscar how to land the ship, but let him do it. He'll allow Oscar to make so many of his own decisions with the wisdom that comes from living forever, but without the pain from it. Oscar says at Volume 8's beginning that without Ozpin, he'd finally started to feel like the Oscar he always wanted to be. But having Ozpin's guidance in Volume 8, I loved watching Oscar become an even better person than that. Ren. Ren won Volume 8 for me. That's how much I love his arc, and before Volume 8 began, I'd be in disbelief if I'd heard myself say that. Starting in Volume 7, it was clear the show was building Ren and Nora up to something. The two acknowledge something is there, but Ren emotionally distances himself almost immediately. The show hides his motivations. I don't know why. To me, that's not the best move. At first, it seems like he's back in the Kuroyuri mindset of focusing only on the mission ahead of him. And that's part of it, but there's more. He disagrees with the mission itself. He says the heroes shouldn't be making these kinds of decisions, which means they should leave them to other people. He wanted to follow Ironwood in Volume 7, and he wishes the heroes didn't go against him here in Volume 8, so it's safe to say he wanted to leave the big decisions to the general. He is going against the very core of the show here, and Yang is there to do the same thing she'll do for RWBY later on. Try to get him back to the show's main ethos of doing things quote-unquote their way. That they have to be the ones to make the big decisions and act against evil. From beginning to end, the Atlas arc is about how their way has huge consequences, so Yang kind of has to reinforce it. And I see Volume 9 as having the kids question probably everything they did in Atlas. Anyway, back to Ren. After Oscar gets captured, Ren takes a beating and he is at his lowest point in this scene. This is a place where he needs to come back from, and I will never get tired of watching this scene because of the camera work, and because of what this means for Ren's character. Then, this scene was such an amazing reveal. This is another one of those scenes where either you say it's paced too quickly or it isn't. How well you take this scene and many others in Volume 8 all depends on your suspension of disbelief. The surprise factor is kind of the point for this one. Since we as an audience know semblances can evolve and we've seen it happen over time as the show airs, we know exactly what is happening here. When Ren and Nora finally reconnect, he's willing and able to say everything to set things right. And for the characters that this show has set up since the beginning to mutually agree they are not good enough for each other yet, that level of maturity suits them right and subverted expectations in the best way that it could have. So yeah, Ren has quickly become one of my favorite characters in this show, and aside from Oscar and Penny, he also carried Volume 8 for me. So again, many characters move forward without their counterparts, proving that plenty still exists within them regardless. And that's true for everyone. Yeah, everyone. Nora. How is Volume 8 so good at making me care so deeply about everyone? You know, the same thing with Ren as I was saying with Volume 7. I just didn't really know how I was supposed to be interpreting their characters, and you just kind of have to wait and see what's going on with them, where their character arcs go before you can really start trying to at least have your criticisms. And with Volume 8, Chapter 3, at first, with Nora's big character moment, I honestly found it kind of lacking. Like, oh, Nora realizes that she doesn't really have a personality without Ren. I guess if you are going to go somewhere with Nora's character, this would be it. And I was like that with it for a long time, and going through Volume 8 and eventually reaching the end and the off-season kicking in and where I am personally in life, and I'm going back and I'm reflecting on Nora's character in Volume 8, and I'm realizing I relate to this. That's actually me right there. That's not a good thing that I empathize with Nora in this moment. This isn't the character you want to relate to. But... oh.
Now, we don't have time to unpack all of that.
I love you, and I miss you.
Salem. Salem once again worked through others to get what she wanted. As much as others turned on her, they're also why she came out victorious. At first, she coordinated an assault that loomed above until she knew she could push in without an issue, and from there, created an endless onslaught of Grimm. It's tough to know what she would have done beyond this if she was successful and nobody turned on her. Salem's main threat in Atlas proper was merely through Grimm, not in any face-to-face with her enemies. Hazel said at the end of Volume 6 that she would do it herself, but like Ozpin, she's only capable of so much as one person, and the story kind of has to build as it goes. So we're kind of clowning if we thought she'd suddenly change her entire strategy to doing everything entirely herself, even if her plan originally might have involved her a lot more heavily if she were more successful. She worked through others for now, but personally I'd say the show has, give or take, 2 more major arcs to go, and in that time I'm expecting her to do more by herself. To be clear, I do believe Salem was just buttering up Cinder here at the end. She sees Cinder as her vessel, her tool. She's trying to keep Cinder useful, but she knows there is a time limit on that. She saw Hazel and Emerald defect, and she has seen Cinder act against orders more than once already. So I don't think Salem will go the way of Neo. Bottom line is, Salem is on paper one of the show's most compelling characters, and I do want the future of the show to focus on her more. Cinder. Cinder. Alright, take a seat, this one's gonna be a while. But before I begin, I'm gonna roll this clip again.
I feel so bad. We've been, like, X character has really gotten the short end of the stick for a while just because of having to prioritize other stuff. There's one character in particular whose backstory we've had to push for 3 seasons because we keep having to do other things first, but that won't be the case forever.
And who got backstory in Volume 8? I feel like every time I talk about Cinder, I have to bring up that clip. That was from early 2020, and now that the volume has come and gone, they have confirmed that was talking about Cinder on the Blu-ray commentary. As I talk about Cinder, please bear in mind I'm not trying to give excuses, just reasons for the way Cinder's story ended up, and I hope it can inform the way you think of her. Basically, the reason it took Cinder until Volume 8 to have any actual character is because it took that long for the writing team to fit her entire backstory into the narrative. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means from the production side of things, because you have to understand, it is more than just about writing the scripts. They had to design and model the entire glass unicorn and all its people. The rest of the pipeline has to work on all of those scenes. There's a lot of technical work involved in all of those scenes that nobody likes talking about that the team would have to do. In Volume 4, the crew had to rebuild the entire show from the ground up with new models for every character and every environment. They had quite a lot on their plate and managed to do it without pushing the volume's premiere date back. So adding Cinder's story might have been the straw to break that production's back. Volume 5, I don't want to talk about, like, we get it, right? The production couldn't handle Volume 5 itself, let alone adding Cinder's backstory to it. Volume 6 had a lot to deal with The Lost Fable alone, which had so many 3D environments and assets for just one behemoth of an episode aside from the rest. So that's likely why it's not there. Then, once the show got to Atlas, call me crazy, but I think where Cinder's story ended up makes the most sense. It's at her lowest point, where a slow beat in the narrative works the best. And I like Volume 7 enough that adding Cinder's story might have just thrown off its mojo a little too much. I think Cinder's low point in Volume 4 could have been the right time, but I don't know what point of the volume I'd put it in since I can't really think of a way that it would mesh with the current pacing. If it weren't Volume 6, I would say Chapter 2, as she claws her way out, would be the best point. Personally, alongside the fact her backstory was meant to be shown during Mistral, I believe it was always meant to be in Mistral. I believe the story itself would be better if that were the case. Given the established corrupt Huntsman underbelly in Mistral, Rhodes would be a lot more believable as someone who would rather train Cinder, perhaps to join him, since he wasn't meant to get her out of her situation. He would be a licensed huntsman, he would be a genuinely caring person, just not as corrupt as the people that he would rescue her from. And perhaps he'd be unable to rescue her for a while due to tensions in the underground crime world, the type of thing featured heavily in the Grim Campaign tabletop RPG show, also made by Rooster Teeth. As for the Cinder of Volume 8's third act, once we've seen her backstory and once Watts served her own ass, she truly elevated her game. This is a Cinder that, yes, we could have gotten volumes ago, and could have even more development up to this point, and made Volume 8 engaging in entirely different ways. But this is still here now, and this Cinder is still worthy, all things considered. Neo. I'll be honest, I rewrote this section multiple times because I kept going back and forth on how I want to think of Neo. The main reason I've watched her ever since she came back was to see when she'd finally turn on Cinder, outsmart her. It should be easy for Neo to do that, since Cinder is so one note, right? So when Cinder learns how to outsmart everyone and come out on top, that undid this hope that I've had for several years, and that kind of sucks. Ever since Volume 8 ended, I've been stuck thinking, Neo never really went against Cinder. But that's not true. She had problems in Volume 7 that grew into trying to force Cinder's hand in Volume 8. It was there, it just didn't work. At the moment, now, I'm not sure she'll ever get vengeance on Cinder, even if she has enough reason to want it, so long as she knows she could get it. But I am still very interested in Volume 9 in general, and for a character who did not exist until the last minute, to be included in a plot twist this planned, there kind of has to be a good reason for it. And because Neo fell, to me it seems like Volume 9 is honestly why they brought her back. But the easiest narrative path to get there was to reintroduce her in Volume 6 before the Atlas arc had so much else that it needed to commit to. Ironwood. Ironwood alongside Penny is a defining character for the Atlas arc. As much as I love how his character had been developing on this path from Volume 2 all the way through Volume 7, I wish Volume 8 had more of an Ironwood that was struggling with his singular focus. Ironwood does not get much screen time, but when he's there, you know exactly what to expect from him. I wish he had more time for the audience to see more of his relationship with his humanity. I know the point of Ironwood is that he doesn't have any humanity until it is too late, and that's fine, but if the writing could share more of why he didn't have any, that would be much better. And that brings me to his semblance. If you're not in the RWBY community, you probably don't know that Ironwood had a semblance. I envy you. And I'm sorry, but what I'm about to share is probably going to make Volume 8 worse in your eyes.
So Ironwood does have a semblance. It's like in the show. It's in like little bits. You can kind of see it. It's more of like a passive semblance that runs in the background. I believe we called it metal. It's kind of like iron resolve / will that like powers him to almost like a very stubbornly narrow set focus like mindset on things. To kind of like push himself to do what he's decided he's going to do. And
it kind of helps him like hyper focus.
Ironwood's semblance exists in this nebulous space where we cannot know how much of an impact it had on him. So to be honest, his character would be so much better if he just did not have it. The Atlas arc would not have been any more difficult to follow if it were never mentioned on that panel. Yet here we are talking about it because its vagueness poorly informs what little of his character was shown. His canon attachment is one of the weaker points of the volume. It does not do him any favors, especially in fight scenes. Like, aside from it making for less interesting fight choreography, Ironwood nerfed himself into the ground. It makes him so much less fun to watch, and if I had to guess, writing-wise, it only exists because there was no other way to do Jacques' death scene. To be honest though, I understand it from a story perspective. Ironwood had a singular focus, and he had his blinders on. To me, you could argue he frankly did not see how having that cannon would be a problem for him. Winter. To me, as the volume went on, Winter became more and more interesting as we try to understand just what her conflicting emotions mean. She shrugs off her emotions here, but she actively goes against orders here. She spent so much time in Volume 7 with Penny, with their back and forths about their relationship with duty, and after Volume 8 separated them until the very end, that final scene clinched it. It did everything it needed to do for both of their characters, as Winter owned up to how robotic she acted. Now, with the Atlas Vault out of the picture, I'm curious to see how the Maiden powers continue to inform her character. Crow and Robin. Their story is the slowest paced of the volume, but it's a lot more personal. I don't think any of the jailed characters needed to be active to make the mark that's right for them at the time. I mean, Watts managed to weasel his way to success even within this, and that speaks really well for him. Or maybe really poorly for Ironwood. As for Crow and Robin, their scenes often started the episodes on a good slower note. And with all that time, it's no wonder that Crow just broods to get to this point. I really want Crow to be able to get back to where he was at the end of Volume 6, that Clover really helped continue, but I'm not sure how that's going to happen, and I'm interested in finding out. Robin could be a defining force for that. That does seem to be the case, given her bird name and the fact that her and Crow's designs somehow managed to share a color palette. Like, seriously, what the heck is going on here? Robin was a very interesting character to watch throughout the Atlas arc, even though on paper it seemed like she was created more for Volume 7 than 8. Emerald and Hazel. In almost every scene Emerald has since this one in Volume 3, Emerald shows some level of discomfort that kind of has to lead to her defecting. Once Mercury left, Cinder went out, and Salem was busy, she had Hazel. And he did more for her in a few hours than Cinder ever would. From a certain angle, I liked Hazel's sacrifice as an extension of his motivation with his sister Gretchen. He had such powerful feelings about her, and about her death, that he would do whatever he could. He would join Salem to set things right with vengeance. He turned on Salem with that same level of motivation, that he would do whatever was in his power to get Oscar and Emerald out of there. Emerald really doesn't like the heroes, but that doesn't matter because they, especially Oscar, who thankfully she does end the volume next to, are willing to give her a place to be. Oscar wasn't at the fall of Beacon, but he sees her as someone who got thrown into the wrong side of the Secret War, and she could be super useful. At the same time, her acceptance near the end of the volume is another thing that you're either willing to believe or not, and I wouldn't put it past you either way, given the scenes that happen after Salem is disabled. May Motherfucking Marigold. What a pleasure to watch throughout Volume 8. Steals every scene that she's in. I hope her message reverberates throughout Volume 9. I really do.
See, you just don't get it! This is not a situation where everyone wins.
She says that like she thinks the kids think they're fighting an entirely different battle. The kids didn't really respond to May in that moment, but I hope Volume 9 references that thought process from May a little bit, perhaps as the kids work themselves up to get back into the fight, if that's even how things go. But I do see Volume 9 as having the kids question that thought process. I love that the show waited to reveal her trans identity in-universe, because that by default shows how everything else about her that you already know is so much more important for her character. And even within that reveal scene, May is saying that her transness is a smaller yet still significant part of her than her allegiance with Mantle. Watts. Watts was always fun to watch, regardless of the scene. Ever since he was introduced, he's been talking down to Cinder.
You hear that? Silence. I have half the mind to thank the little girl that bested you.
That is literally the first thing we, the audience, know about him. He was a top-tier antagonist of the Atlas arc who turned many situations to his favor. Christopher Sabat nailed the performance, and he was the perfect villain you love to hate. I'll be honest, I'm gonna miss him. I do hope that the rest of the villains make up for his absence and start getting as engaging and fun to watch as he was. I'm glad Tyrion is still around at least, and all Mercury has is potential. Harriet. I love her. As simple and stubborn as her motivation is, that's honestly a great selling point for me. This is the one thing she cares about. She believes in falling in line, and man, does she have a grudge to prove. She put her blinders on and only saw red. Marrow. I also enjoyed, but I don't have as much to add since his path was fairly straightforward. Wow, that's a lot of characters. As for the remaining players, Elm, Vine, Joanna, Fiona, Whitley, Willow, Klein, Tyrion, Mercury, Pietro, Maria. All I want to say is that the writers did a great job of giving them the time that they could to get their due. If it was clear they only have these 1 or 2 scenes, they need to leave their mark on them, and their full character needs to come out, and that happened. Fiona had more time in Volume 7, so Volume 8 made sure her friends came through. The Schnee family really showed up for the second act. For Pietro and Maria, the show really could have added 1 or 2 shots of them floating in the tundra at some point at the end. Maybe showing them landing somewhere would move their story along too fast for what the writing wants, but not showing them at all is worse. The Aesops are the Aesops, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where Mercury and Tyrion's arc goes in the future. This scene sets the tone for their characters moving forward, and Vacuo is an inviting environment for hostile people. And yep, that's all I have to say about all the characters. I'm not forgetting anybody. Nope. All in all, Volume 8 raised the stakes in ways that the series has very much needed. It was a little too jam-packed with huge moments, and it drove many character arcs forward, though not always giving them all the time to do so convincingly. Looking forward, Volume 9 is set to be an entirely different experience, but with Volume 8 now in the past, it is the perfect time to slow the plot down and add new elements that will forever change the way we see the rest of the show. That should be everything I have to say about Volume 8, but if I have anything more to say, I will put it in a pinned comment, so check down below and leave me some of your thoughts while you're there. Was Volume 8 some of the most hyped content that you've seen from RWBY in a long time? Or were you honestly hoping that the pace would slow down more often than not to give the characters more room to breathe? Let me know down below. While you're around, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. I'm Raijin Rising. Have a good one. The production quality process.